and that's the angle. Here now is former U.S. Attorney Joe diGenova, senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, Victor Davis Hanson, and former Clinton aide and attorney Richard Goodstein. All right, Richard, after today and what I just laid out on the angle, how can Democrats or you in any real and credible way object to Bill Barr's nomination?
I think the paramount influence right now where we are as a country is to follow the mold of Elliot Richardson. When he was confirmed as Attorney General in the midst of Watergate, when we had a president that was under a legitimate investigation, who said, if I'm asked to basically fire, or if the special counsel is fired, I quit. And Bill Ruckelshaus, his deputy, did the same thing. And when the Archibald Cox was fired, they said it was the easiest decision they ever had to make in life. They were lionized for it, but they quit because that's what they had promised to do. I was waiting for Barr, frankly, in the interest of the country. Look, if we cared about the rule of law, Donald Trump should testify about everything he knows.
Okay,
openly
Richard,
and publicly. That's what the rule of law.
Okay, I appreciate the walk down memory lane to the 1970s, as fascinating as that is.
It's not.
And
it's
very compelling in a way. But he said today, and Joe diGenova, you watch this. He said, "I would not fire Mueller without good cause." Now, some conservatives, as I pointed out in the angle, and on Twitter, you can see their comments. They're nervous because they think, wait a second, is this kind of a stealth nominee? I heard the word Trojan horse used several times today. But you could respond to Richard's point that he wasn't definitive enough in saying, I will not fire Bob Mueller.
Yeah, well, what you saw, to my conservative friends who are worried about Bill Barr, where are you going to go? Ghostbusters, for heaven's sakes? This guy is an established, serious lawyer. He's a scholar. He's an intellectual. And by the way, 68 is very young.
Thank you, Joe.
Let's get over that nonsense. Today you saw the Kavanaugh effect. The Democrats didn't even get close to being as obnoxious and unprofessional as they were in the Kavanaugh hearings. They asked some pointed questions. Most of them were well within the range, except for some occasional stupid questions from Cory Booker and, of course, crazy Mazie Hirono. But I must say this. Bill Barr gave perfect answers. He indicated that he was his own person. He would make independent judgments. It's all you can ask from a serious person. And I think the Democrats have actually caved. This is over. He's going to be voted out of committee. He's going to be confirmed. And Elliot Richardson, God rest his soul. That's all fine and wonderful. Bill Barr has to deal with today. And right now, he's going to be the next Attorney General. And let me tell you, the people in the FBI and the DOJ who conspired to deny Donald Trump his civil rights, both during the election, during the transition, and after he became president, when they committed those crimes, they are shaking in their boots at the thought of Bill Barr being the next Attorney General of the United States.
Victor, why is it so important now that Bill Barr assume the position of Attorney General, given all that we've learned back during the campaign, to the dossier, to the media leaks, what we learned today and what we learned last Friday? Why is Barr really kind of an ingenious choice at this point in the history of the agency?
Well, because he's taking over a Justice Department that's had a large number of departures, and an FBI where at least 10 people have been reassigned, retired, or fired. So the agency has lost its reputation, and so has the Department of Justice. But more importantly, his task is to reestablish the concept of equality under the law, because we know that people like James Comey were leaking, Andrew McCabe was leaking, Baker was leaking. We know that FISA courts were deceived. We know that the director of the FBI went before Congress under oath 245 times, said he didn't know or didn't remember something. If they bring Trump up to Mueller and he did that, they would indict him. So there's a perception out there in America, whether it's warranted or not, that there's two sets of laws. There's Mueller's investigation of Trump that goes over, every type of business, tax relationship, the whole 20 months worth of investigation. And then there's these key players in the FBI and DOJ. They're involved in behaviors. I'm not even getting in to the unmasking and leaking of the Mike Flynn or the National Security Council's leaking of unmasked names or the Hillary Clinton's warped probe. But there's this perception that there's no equality under the law, and that's fatal for a democracy. So that's what he has to do. He has to look at all of this behavior, not just the Mueller investigation, but all of the tangential behavior, and ask himself, was American federal law applied equally across the board, regardless of a person's stature, income, money, or position? And so far, that hasn't been true.
Richard, are you concerned at all about the revelations about the general counsel of the Department of Justice under criminal investigation for his contacts with the media, including, I mean, David Corn, I've known him since my days on another network, working on another network, but he's, he's a left-wing guy, he's a reporter, but is that really what we should be using the Department of Justice for? Weaponizing information to hurt political opponents? Isn't that what police states do?
With the way that Donald Trump has tweeted against so many different individuals in the FBI, I'm shocked that this is the only one.
So is that a yes or no, Richard? Are you concerned? So you're not concerned, for the record, you are not concerned about the general counsel of the DOJ weaponizing information and using it against the president for political purposes. That's what was happening here. I'm
saying that a guy who's senior in the FBI should not be leaking. As I'm saying as well, somehow there's this equation with what's happening to him with the fact that we have a president who said to the Russians, steal from my opponent, who was welcoming their help, who basically sided with Putin against his own intelligence community, who sees the notes of his interpreter. Somehow there's this equation, which is why the rest of the country, Laura, doesn't buy into what Victor just said. It's why in the run-up to the 2018 elections, there was this kind of addled view of what was the public thought. The people aren't with you. I'm sorry.
All right, I'm glad Richard brought that point up, Joe, and then Victor, you can respond. Mazie Hirono, Joe affectionately referred to her as Crazy Maisie. I completely reject that characterization, Joe. They give her too much credit. Okay, so she stepped forward, and again, it was a desperate attempt to try to take down Barr today in referencing this deal. Let's watch.
It is so not normal to have to ask, well, whose side is the president on, a Russia's side or our side? It is the accumulation of these, what seems like unusual, head-scratching, disparate kinds of utterances from him. But when you start to see a pattern where he basically spouts Putin's lies, then we have to ask the most unusual and frightening question about our own president.
It's a normal question, Joe.
Yeah, well, look, Mazie Hirono represents the looniest part of the Democratic Party. Those delusional comments from, a hula hoop senator really show how pathetic their arguments have become. If they really were concerned about the Russians, they would have been concerned about President Obama telling Mr. Medvedev that he would have more flexibility after the election to kowtow to Putin. They would have been concerned about the removal of defensive missiles from Eastern Europe. They would have been concerned about all the things that Hillary Clinton tried to do to so-called reset the relationship with Russia. This is a phony argument that the Democrats are making because they have nothing else. And as part of the conspiracy to frame Donald Trump, which we now see playing out on the front page of the New York Times, this is where they end up. They end up in the loony bin. And I must say, I'm delighted that Mazie Hirono continues to go on television, make a fool of herself and the Democratic Party, and I hope she never stops.
All right, VDH, you get to close it out, about 30 seconds.
Yeah, what would have happened in 2012 if a more conservative Bob Mueller had heard that open mic conversation that Obama did with the Russian president was a quid pro quo, and then he said, "My God, there was a Russian reset." There was the Romney, making fun of Romney about playing down the Russian threat. There was inviting Putin into the Middle East. He hadn't been there in 40 years. The inaction toward Crimea and Ukraine aggressions, downplaying the production of oil.
At every turn, you could see everything that they claim Trump is, they did.
And there's one superseding fact, which is that the Russians aided Donald Trump in the views of every single U.S. intelligence agency. That's undisputed.
They apparently did Barack Obama because they were flexible during the election.
Let me tell you who the real Russian agent was. Barack Obama was the real Russian agent. Barack Obama was the Russian agent.
Well, I think one thing is clear after this, whoever you come down on this, Bill Barr is going to be the next Attorney General of the United States, and I don't see how we could really get someone more qualified or more of a professional. And putting up with those stupid questions he had today, he has a lot more patience than I do. So I can say that.